time.
Alright guys, welcome back, and today we're going to be doing the front brakes on the CLK. So just in keeping the trend with the last video, I'm just going to be doing general maintenance stuff on the cars. Last time I did I fixed the door switch on the E-Class. Today I'm doing front brakes on the CLK. I'm also going to lube some of the lower control arm joints because they're starting to squeak. I know they need to be replaced, but I don't want to postpone this video to get those parts in. So I heard that you could put some silicone spray and it'll kind of eliminate or somewhat eliminate the squeaking, but it is a temporary fix. Further down the line, I'm gonna get new lower control arms and correct the problem correctly. So let's get to it. So I know there's a ton of videos on YouTube on how to change your brakes. This is not going to be anything new. The real purpose of this video is for those of you who never did them before and are afraid to attempt to do it because it's a Mercedes. You know, this is an older Mercedes. This is a 2005. I know cars now have the hydraulic or electronic emergency brakes. You got to be careful with those if you don't know what you're doing. But these older cars, they don't have that. So it's no different than any other car. As a matter of fact, I think Mercedes are easier than some other cars to change the brakes on. So this is like I guess a video if you ever been on debating whether or not to do it yourself. This is a video for you to kind of take it and run with it. It's not that big of a deal. So I already jacked up the car. Mercedes has a central jacking point underneath the engine. Usually has like a heavy rubber pad, so you can actually lift the whole front at the same time. And then I put some supports underneath, lifts on both sides, so at the jacking points. So next step is going to be to pop open the hood and open the brake fluid reservoir. Alright, so Mercedes, and all Mercedes do this, I don't care how old they are, they're able to lift the hood basically 180 degrees like this, or 90 degrees I should say, to the car. So it'll give you plenty of access. Let me zoom in over here. So the the brake fluid reservoir is located here. There's these two quarter-turn screws, and you basically remove this panel, and this is the brake fluid reservoir. All you gotta do is basically unscrew the top and leave it off. When you squeeze the caliper to get the caliper off, you're gonna have to push the pistons on the caliper back, and that is gonna push some of the oil that's in the caliper back into the reservoir, and lifting the cap off just helps the force that pushes back on you, just helps relieve that. Alright guys, one thing I forgot to mention, before I put the car in jack stands, you have to break the wheel nuts with, or the wheel bolts with the breaker bar, because if you don't, the wheel spins, so you're not going to be able to do it after it's up in the air. So I just forgot to mention that, but right now, let's go and remove the wheel and get to it. Alright, so to get better access to the caliper, you want to turn the wheel like away from you so you have more access to the bolts that are back here. So what I'm gonna use is this. It's basically like a swivel or a ball joint socket, and it's gonna be 18 millimeter to remove the two bolts that are back here that hold the caliper in place. Okay, so the caliper bolts have been removed. So now what you need is to get something to suspend the caliper up while they remove the rotor. I like using these bungees, but you could use anything. Alright, so we got the bolts removed on the caliper, but the caliper stuck onto the rotor just because it still has that hydraulic pressure in there. What you could do is you could try to pry a little bit on the brake pad, just push it away from the caliper to help to push that piston back in. These are a floating caliper, so what you can do also is you know, obviously we're changing the whole disc, but if you were just changing the pads, you wouldn't actually remove the caliper bracket, you would just remove the floating caliper. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to remove the two little bolts, the floating pins on the caliper, and that should kind of allow me to separate the front and the back part of this caliper, and that'll make it easier, because right now it's just on there. Even though it's unbolted, you can see it's rotating. It's just really stuck onto the caliper, to the rotor. And these rotors are pretty past their prime, that they have a heavy lip right here, and that's really what it's catching on the lip of the rotor. So so we're gonna go ahead and remove these bolts and just get my sockets. So it looks like it's a 12 millimeter, so we're just gonna remove these. Two of those. By the way, if you were again just changing the pads, this would be the process anyway. You would have to just separate the caliper from the caliper bracket. So alright, now to remove the caliper, I have a 1/4 inch spacer for my wheels in the front, so you won't have this, but that's pretty relevant. And then you need to remove the caliper set screw here. It looks like it's a Torx 30. You want to put a screwdriver or something on the rotor so it doesn't move on you. Tap that in. Guys, I just had a 25-minute battle with the stupid little set screw because it was completely corroded. You're gonna come across hiccups like this. Now, the reason why I like to do the brakes myself is because I like to put anti-seize on that part, because it's always a pain in the ass. The screws always strip, or they don't strip, but they're usually a Torx or a hex, and the head strips. So it was a pain in the ass, but luckily I had this extractor kit. I really lucked out because I've broken all of these. This was the only size left, and it was the size I needed. So I basically just drilled out the screw head, and you could see, I mean, it's full of corrosion on there. So yeah, I always like to put a little bit of anti-seize on this. This doesn't hold the caliper to the hub, it just holds it for you to line up the holes, and it's actually your wheel bolts that hold everything together. Okay, so this is the new rotors. They have a zinc coating on them. This is these are Zimmerman, and these are the Akabono ceramic brake pads. It comes with. It does not come with any hardware, which is kind of disappointing. It comes with a little bit of brake lube, but what that means is I have to clean up and reuse these clips here, and just not the end of the world. I've done that before, but it is nice when you buy brake pads and it comes with new hardware. Although I have bought brake pads and the hardware it came with didn't fit the car, so just look out for that. So you want to lubricate the glide pins on the caliper. Make sure you use the correct lubricant. Alright, I also gave the caliper a bit of a wire brush cleaning, and also the edge of the piston. You got to be careful to not brush the rubber grommet around the outside or the bellows with the wire brush, because you could damage it and then you're in big trouble then. Also like to put little anti-seize around the lip here. But before I do that, what we got to do is we got to push back the cylinder or this piston. And this might be the only specialty tool. You don't have to do this. You could actually, there's people that put a block here and they just use channel locks. But this, if you could buy this, this is a pretty cheap tool. I think it's under $10. You could find it on eBay. And basically what you do is you put an old brake pad on the piston, and then you kind of install this thing here. This only works on floating calipers, by the way. If you have a Brembo style brake caliper, this won't work. But basically, once you have that set up, zoom this in. Let's see what I'm talking about. So basically, what you do now is you just push this screw slowly, and what happens is you're pushing this piston back in, and the brake fluid is gonna go back up into the reservoir. That's the reason we took the cap off before. So you're gonna push this all the way back so that then you have enough clearance to get it over the brake pads. Okay, that's as far as it goes. Remove this, remove the old brake pad, and you could see the piston is now collapsed all the way in. So now it's time to put the bracket on, the rotor, the caliper, and we could install our brake pads as well. Alright guys, so it's been a week later. So this video kind of backfired on me. So the whole purpose of this video was to tell everybody that has a Mercedes that it's not a big deal. You could do your own brakes. It's not any different than any other car. And I had that incident with the set screw being stripped. So I guess the lesson is you kind of have to expect these little things. If I was a professional mechanic, it would have been the same thing. The only difference is I probably would have had a part supplier that could call up and they would deliver the part the same day. So I don't have that luxury, but I also don't have that much counting on me because it's my car. It's a spare car. I have extra cars. So but I ordered a 4-pack of these things just for cheap insurance in the future. The one on the passenger side came out fine, no issues. It was just the driver's side. Like I said before, this car uses a floating caliper, so what that means is that you have to basically grease these slide pins. You don't have to do it, I always like to do it, but you do need to use the appropriate grease. It's not just any grease. It's one specially for brakes. And I also cleaned this hardware since my pads didn't come with any hardware. They're usually made out of stainless steel, so usually they don't corrode. Mine just had some heavy brake dust film on it, but if yours are corroded, you should definitely get new ones. In any case, so the next step is to bolt the caliper bracket back onto the spindle, get the pads on there, and we're going to put some copper grease on the back of the pads to prevent any squeaking, and then we can mount the caliper back up. Let's get to it. I'm going to torque these. Check for your specific car. You should check. I'm just going to torque them to 90. I think that's plenty. To me, it should be just a little bit below whatever your lug bolts are. So. I'm gonna use copper grease on the back of the pads, but there are cheaper options. There you go. Actually, I bought this to try, and I really prefer the aluminum NTCs, and it works just as well for this application. And it's, I believe, about almost half the price. So I don't think you need to go with the copper grease if you got the aluminum stuff. Alright guys, so we're onto the passenger side. Just want to talk about a couple of things because I didn't get it on camera, but when you take the caliper off on the passenger side, and this is pretty much all Mercedes vehicles, you'll see there is going to be one of these guys here mounted up, and what this does is it's the carrier for the brake pad wear sensor, which looks like this little guy, and this part here plugs into this plug, and the other end plugs into the actual brake pad. So basically it's a plastic sleeve with a metal wire inside, and once it's worn completely, it closes the circuit and it sends a signal. So this is just held on to the actual caliper with this small screw. You need a 8mm socket to take that out, and you just need to take that out first, move it out of the way so it doesn't get damaged. But if you do not replace that or put it back, you will get an error code, so just keep that in mind. Alright, so you saw I took some of the excess brake fluid out of here with a turkey baster. This was 100% clean. I'm gonna use the same oil back because I just had the brakes flushed, so I know this is fresh oil, or fresh brake fluid I should say. I'm gonna just top it off a little bit, and that's actually overfilled, but I'm gonna press down the brake, so you'll see that will go down substantially. Alright, didn't go down that much, but remember, the brake pads are a lot thicker now, so it's the piston doesn't need to come out as further out as it did before, so that's why I'm not going to need to put that much brake fluid back into it. I think I'm just going to press it one more time. I think that's pretty good, so I'm not going to add any more. I'm actually, yeah, I think I'm going to leave it the way it is. So basically, we're all done. Only step left to do is get the wheels back on, and we could get the car off the jack stands. Alright guys, so everything's done. That last step was basically to just lower the car enough that the front wheels are making contact with the ground, so that when I torque them they didn't spin. I only like to lower it a little bit, not all the way down. When I do that, just enough that the wheel won't spin when you tighten it. Other than that, it's all done. It's all set. Obviously, the next step would be to take it out for a test drive. There's also a brake bedding process, which I'm not going to get into in this video. Although some brake companies, which I believe like Brembo, they do not tell you to do a bedding process. They tell you to just drive the car. So I've done both, and to tell you the truth, to me, I never noticed a difference. I've never seen it like the brakes last longer because of it, or last less because of it. I don't know. I think it comes down to every manufacturer has their own procedure or preference, and I guess you have to decide on your own what works for you. But in any case, the car's all done. Hope you enjoyed this video. I had a lot of hiccups along the way, which wasn't the plan. The plan was to show you how simple it is. Hopefully you guys got enough information to be able to do your own brakes. I didn't get into the rear brakes. The only difference on the rear brakes is usually the components are smaller, so it's easier in that sense. What I noticed, because I don't have a lift that makes the rear brakes a little bit tougher, is I kept turning the wheels. So if I'm working on the left caliper, I turned the wheels all the way to the right, so I had the back of the caliper exposed, easy access to the bolts. You got good leverage to use the torque wrench. And then when I'm working on the right side, I did the opposite. I turned full lock to the left to work on the right side. Obviously in the rear they don't turn, so you're basically have to kind of get behind the car to get better leverage. Other than that, it's the same process, nothing different about it. The only other thing is, like, if your car has the electronic emergency brake, so if it's a newer model, you can't press the parking brake. Like right now, you put the parking brake on to work on the front so that the car doesn't roll away. Well, when you work on the rear, you can't do that. You have to leave the parking brake off, and you just have to cock your wheels so the car doesn't roll away. Make sure you're in a flat surface. If you do that with a electronic rear brake, what will happen is it's like a worm screw, so it will actually push the piston right out of the caliper, and all the oil will bleed all over the place. You do not want to, if you don't feel comfortable with it, leave it alone. Get it to a professional. But if you don't have electronic emergency brakes, it's pretty much the same thing as what you just saw. So guys, thanks again for watching. Please subscribe and like, and see you next time.